Before Before I jump right in, I do want to let you know that some of the things that I discuss might be sensitive or distressing. So I'm going to talk about things like gender-based discrimination, systemic oppression, mental health, misdiagnosis, masking, etc. These topics can be deeply personal and they might bring up some strong emotions. So if you do need to step away or leave the session, please do. Like I said, this will be recorded so you can watch it later. And I also want to ask that if you do share any stories or ask any questions, to please give space for people to do so. And it is a respectful place, and we're all um, by joining and asking questions, committing to collective well-being. So first, I want to acknowledge that I am joining you, and Learn, Develop, Succeed is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. As an educator, it's really important for me to continue to dismantle traditional education systems. And part of doing that is sharing information and resources about Indigenous learning or Indigenous stories related to neurodivergence. So what I've shared here is a QR code that'll link you to Outdoor Learning School, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to helping people get back out into nature and look at learning in a different way and participate in learning in a different way. My name is Becky Bishop. I'm the Senior Manager of Youth and Adult Programs here at Learn, Develop, Succeed. We are a BC nonprofit charity. We've been around for 55 years, I believe. And our mission is to support all unique learners in achieving their learning goals, including children from age 3 to adults. So across all age groups and all forms of development and learning. And I wanted to do a little bit of a different self-introduction today. These are two of my photos. I was born and have benefited from the unceded island of the Gatamaguk, which is home to several Indigenous groups. If you don't know Katamakuk, it's Newfoundland. So on Newfoundland, we have many Indigenous people, including Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit people. And it's also the ancestral territory of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever because of the impact of European settlers. Um, so like many Newfoundlanders, I have a very deep relationship with the land and especially with the sea. And growing up and growing older, and especially in my career, I've really grown a deep appreciation for diversity and different perspectives. So when I'm learning about Indigenous perspectives, I latch on to this perspective of multiple truths and recognizing that difference is a strength. So these two photos that I took during my last visit, the first one is a photo taken in an antique shop in downtown St. John's, which is the main city. And the other is a photo that is taken in the Twillingate area. If you've ever seen photos of icebergs in Newfoundland, they're in Twillingate, most likely. And so for me, these two photos really represent my love of collecting things and looking at collections. And it really tickles my neurodivergent brain. And when I collect things like rocks or sticks or shells, it's a form of self-care. So getting lost in this antique shop or on the rocky shore just is very freeing to me in terms of getting out of like rigid society, and it really helps me to realign with the natural rhythms of my body. And the reason I point this out is because there's a particularly beautiful alignment between neurodivergent and Indigenous perspectives in this shared resistance to colonial and ableist systems. And it's also a nod of encouragement to all of you to step outside of that mindset and reimagine what your life could be, what the community could be, or even what the world could be if we thought about or did things differently. So my goal for this workshop is to help you reflect on how you can show up for neurodivergent individuals. So I will start by helping you to understand what ADHD is, what neurodivergence is, and then to recognize some of the barriers that ADHDers face, and finally give you some strategies to support people with ADHD. So to understand neurodiversity, it's really important to acknowledge that we all already know that our brain is very different from everyone else's brain. Before I flip to the next slide, I'd like to ask you all to unmute yourselves for just a moment. And so when I click to the next slide, you are going to see what looks like a word search. And you're just going to shout out whatever words you see. So even if someone else is talking, it doesn't matter. Just keep saying all of the words that you see. So I will wait for a couple more people to unmute themselves. Thank you.
Daddy.
All right, so when you're ready, just say some words that you see.
Genuine.
Raw.
Well,
Thank you. Praise.
Pro.
Excel.
No.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you.
Genuine.
no.
Eat.
Had.
Motive.
Eat. Good.
Peace.
All right,
Good.
great. So I'll
Yes.
stop you there and you can mute yourselves again. So just want to kind of give a little bit of perspective of what it feels like to have an ADHD brain. It just spits out things all of the time. So you're constantly just have thoughts and ideas they're just coming and you can't really stop them. So when we are talking about neurodiversity and ADHD, it's important to know how the brain functions. So your brain receives information from its environment through your senses. It compares it to what you already know, and then it responds. So it might respond with a problem-solving strategy, or you might be responding to a person or responding with emotion. So your brain uses different areas to handle tasks such as memory recall or controlling body movement, etc. So if you imagine your brain as a living network of waterways, rivers, creeks, springs, etc., and they all flow across the land and they connect everything. So just like water nourishes the land, your brain's nerve cells, which are also called neurons, use pathways to carry thoughts and memories and emotions. So when you experience something or you think about something, it's like you're sending a boat down a stream. So the water is carrying it to its destination. So the destination might be an idea or a memory or a skill. And some of those routes, like neuropaths, are well traveled. So they are wide rivers, they flow very easily, and lots of things can move through them. So that could be things that come naturally to us, things that we've practiced or experienced over and over again. And then we may also have others that are new and they're just forming. So they are carving new paths. They might be new experiences or things that we are currently learning and growing pathways. And over time, those smaller trickles can lead to another waterway, or maybe it becomes a big river and a new skill is learned. And that connects to your network of knowledge. And then if we are looking at the last picture, there are going to be natural storms. So if we experience something like trauma, it can wash away some of those familiar routes. It can block a passage with debris or just dry up altogether. So like the water and the land will remember those things just like your brain does. And sometimes that water gets stuck, so it can't move. And in those moments, that's when learning feels really difficult. And then at other times, maybe water just floods in. So like we just experienced, you just get this flood of thought or this flood of emotion, and it can be really difficult to control. But again, that's a natural occurrence. So like we can't force it back in, but we can acknowledge it and follow its natural flow to get back to rhythm and purpose. So when those new streams form and we get new pathways, it's very similar to how our brain rewires or creates new neural paths for well-being, especially after traumatic experiences. So again, we don't control the rain, we don't control the storm, we can't force things to go where we think they should go, but when we are giving it space, time, connection, we clear those blockages and we restore that flow. So a couple of things that are really important to acknowledge when we're talking about how our brain works. The first being self-regulation, which is the ability to manage your thoughts, emotions, and actions in ways that support your goals and support your well-being. So it's being able to focus your attention or shift between tasks or recover from a challenge. When somebody has difficulty with self-regulation, they might appear to be distracted or unmotivated or disruptive, but it's usually behaviors that are signaling that somebody is dysregulated. And so closely related to that is sensory processing, which is the way that our nervous system receives, interprets, and responds to sensory information. So that includes your 5 basic senses, sight, sound, touch, and it also includes things like movement and your internal signals like hunger or pain. Everybody experiences sensory processing differently. So some people might be sensory seeking, which means that they need more sensory input in order to feel alert and focused. So that might look like fidgeting or needing movement or craving spicy food. And on the other hand, some people might be sensory sensitive, which means that they get overwhelmed by sensory input. So maybe bright lights or loud noises can make somebody get quite overwhelmed. Some people experience both, depending on the day, depending on the environment. And then a third is executive functioning, which refers to a set of mental skills that help us to plan, focus, remember instructions, shift between tasks, like our brain's management system. So when somebody's having challenges with executive functioning, they might have a lot of motivation and desire to do something, but they might not be able to get started on that task. And for ADHDers, especially, executive functioning skills can be quite inconsistent. So one day they're doing great and they're able to get things done, no roadblocks. And then the next day they're struggling, they're forgetting things, they're having trouble breaking down a task, and they end up feeling very overwhelmed. So you can think of it kind of like one of these clicky pens where there are multiple colors. Um, each one is an executive function. So for somebody like an average person, you might click one down and it does the function you want it to do. But for somebody who might be neurodivergent or have ADHD, maybe the color gets stuck or your brain's trying to push them all down at one time and nothing happens. So when we're talking about self-regulation and sensory processing and executive functioning, it has a great impact on how somebody processes information and experiences day-to-day life. And for self-regulation and executive functioning, those are two sets of skills that require intentional support and practice, but unfortunately, it's not always explicitly taught, and we're expected to learn it through observation. So observing our parents or friends or teachers, and it's not actually explicitly taught. So all three of those things can be, those challenges and strengths can be experienced by anybody. But for neurodiverse individuals, those impacts can be much more pronounced. So when we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about the full spectrum of brain-based differences. So that includes both neurodivergent and neurotypical individuals. So neurodivergent would be the natural variance of brain function and ways of processing information, whereas neurotypical is seen as the standard functioning. But really important to note that when we talk about standard ways of functioning or normal brains, those things are culturally constructed standards when we're referring to neurodivergence. So it doesn't actually indicate a fault. It's just the way that we as a society have put meaning to those kinds of things. Neurodivergence is a very natural and valuable form of human diversity. And so when we talk about neurodivergence, it's typically looked at from a learning or educational lens, but there are actually many different things that fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence. So we can look at specific learning disorders like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, but then it also encompasses neurological conditions like ADHD, autism, PTSD, etc. So ADHD, which is what we are here for, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is a brain variance that affects somebody's ability to focus or regulate attention, control their impulses or emotions, and to manage hyperactivity. So it's one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders in Canada. So approximately 1 in 21 individuals who are diagnosed. It's important to distinguish between diagnosed and undiagnosed. There's probably far more who are undiagnosed. So if you think about the average classroom size, which is 26, there'd be at least one person with diagnosed ADHD in that class. And ADHD and its symptoms really change the way that individuals function in many areas. So work, school, or relationships. And again, based on what we as a society have decided is the way things should be. So there are a couple of types of ADHD, and depending on symptoms, a person would be categorized as either hyperactive impulsive, inattentive, or a combination. So if we are looking at individuals who are diagnosed as hyperactive impulsive, they tend to be full of energy. They're often bringing a lot of excitement and movement. They learn best through hands-on experiences, and they learn best through active engagement. They are more willing to take risks and act very decisively, typically thinking outside of the box, very lively, very engaging. Individuals who are diagnosed as inattentive tend to have the ability to focus on multiple things at once, and they typically are able to problem solve very creatively. They are able to see the big picture of things and see quite far ahead when talking about problem solving, very adaptable. They thrive in environments where flexibility is very important and it's not just the same thing over and over again, typically naturally curious, etc. And so individuals who are diagnosed as combined either have some or all of the traits that are found in the other two categories. And so while we are shifting to a more strengths-based view of ADHD, still really important to acknowledge how challenging it is to have ADHD in a world that is not built for somebody with ADHD. So looking at how the brain works, how the ADHD brain works, there is a lot of research being done on how the brain's neural circuits work, and a lot of that is done by color-coded. So some of that research is also looking at understanding how how the ADHD brain functions. So when we're looking at these different areas, starting with the prefrontal cortex, which is right at the front of your brain, it's responsible for executive functions like planning or decision making or impulse control. And so when somebody has ADHD, the prefrontal cortex has reduced activity, which means that it's going to have a lot of difficulty managing those executive functions. So that might look like difficulty with filtering distractions or regulating behavior, making it harder to think ahead or stay focused. And so then the green area, the limbic system, that's involved in processing emotions and motivation. So when that emotional regulation part is more challenging, the heightened emotional response or mood swings become much more intense. So if we're experiencing some intense reactions, it will probably lead to some emotional dysregulation. So maybe 1 second we are quite excited, but then something goes wrong and we get very frustrated. So it's like a very significant mood swing. And then we're looking at the yellow section, the basal ganglia. So that's a group of structures responsible for our motor control and our habits and processing information between different parts of our brain. So the basal ganglia depend on dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, and it's critical for motivation, reward, and attention. So because they rely so heavily on dopamine to function correctly, and in ADHD brains, there's typically an imbalance of dopamine that contributes to challenges with those areas like motivation and goal-directed behavior. They can also affect how much activity is happening in your body. So it can lead to things like hyperactivity or fidgeting. And then the last area, the reticular activating system, is it's part of your brainstem, and it controls your wakefulness and your arousal and how you can focus. So it depends a lot on the noradrenaline, which is another another neurotransmitter that's very important for ADHD brains, but is imbalanced. So when that stimuli can't be filtered, it can lead to overstimulation or understimulation, and again, shifting attention. So that's a lot about what ADHD is on like a definition basis. But I want to jump into the experience of somebody with ADHD. So ADHD is a stable disability, which means it does not go away, but its presentation can change at different stages of a person's life. ADHD is usually diagnosed during early childhood, more so for boys, because symptoms become more noticeable when kids start going to school and they're expected to follow instructions and sit still for a longer period of time. So children with ADHD tend to have high levels of energy, very creative, very curious, and you might also see some hyper focus on things that they're very interested in. But that impulsivity tends to be the most prominent. And when we see it outwardly, it looks like fidgeting or running around or waiting their turn. And when children move into adolescence, that hyperactivity often decreases, but the inattention and the impulsivity will remain. And as schoolwork becomes more demanding, those things become more noticeable. And as teens, that emotional regulation and self-esteem part of it becomes much more prominent, and especially if they are becoming more aware of their differences. And teens with ADHD, they can be very quick problem solvers, very highly creative, very spontaneous, and sometimes that does work in their favor, but it can be a challenge, especially if they're participating in risky behavior, which is quite common for teens, regardless of their neurotype. And then in adulthood, ADHD can look quite different again. So that hyperactivity is going to decrease further. The executive functioning and emotional regulation is going to become the bigger challenges. So many adults with ADHD, whether they're diagnosed or not, develop coping mechanisms in order to make it through school or to make it through work. Um, and although they have many strengths like creativity, adaptability, and problem solving, not all environments are supportive to that. So they typically thrive in environments where there's a lot of flexibility. They're able to have some autonomy and decide what it is that they're going to be working on, hands-on tasks, etc. And so many ADHD adults are very successful, but that expectation to keep up with society combined with those underlying challenges can have a really significant impact on self-esteem. And so when all of these things are misunderstood and the way that ADHDers process information and function is misunderstood, they tend to experience some very complex, deeply rooted social barriers. So if we start with ableism, which is the systemic discrimination against people who are perceived as less able, the most common form of that we see for ADHDers comes from the belief that accessibility is only necessary for visible or physical differences. So that shows up in ways like rigid expectations for communication or productivity or behavior that's rooted in those neurotypical norms. And when somebody might struggle to meet those expectations, they're usually labeled as lazy or defiant or disorganized. And then on the other hand, if an ADHDer is competent in some areas, people might assume that they don't need any support or accommodation. So, you look fine to me, or you just need to work a little bit harder. And that mindset really erases the variability of the neurodivergent experience, and it overlooks any extra effort that might be happening behind the scenes. And that need to prove that you need support can be very exhausting cycle of explaining or defending yourself and sometimes even downplaying your experience to be taken seriously. And that becomes an undue burden to conform to those systems instead of pushing them to adapt, which again reinforces that idea that access is optional. And even with an increased awareness of ADHD, the stigma is very deeply entrenched. And it's so stigma is a set of harmful beliefs around a person or group of people who share a common trait. So for an ADHDer, that might look like being denied when you request accommodations, or again, being dismissed because you seem fine to me. And it's deeply embedded in our schools and our workplaces and our healthcare systems, everyday interactions. And it can start as early childhood through punishment for behaviors that are misunderstood. So over time, when that externalized stigma is repeated or intense, it can become an internalized stigma, which is the belief that someone's struggles are a personal failure and not a result of an inaccessible system. And that internal stigma can damage your self-worth. It can make people less likely to advocate for themselves or to ask for help or believe that they deserve support. And all of those things can delay or prevent diagnosis. It increases mental health challenges, and it can lead to long-term mental health harm. And, and that impact of stigma can also lead to exclusion, which is a very common experience for ADHDers. So that exclusion might look like being left out of group work or being passed over for a promotion at work. And it's also structural. So when we build environments around this assumption that everybody thinks the same way, everybody learns the same way, we are again reinforcing the harmful idea that access is optional and that if somebody has needs, it makes them a burden. So if you think about children who are developing their identities and they rely very heavily on relationships for emotional safety and self-worth, that exclusion can be particularly damaging. And then in order to cope with that ableism, the stigma, the exclusion, many ADHDers mask. And masking is either the conscious or unconscious behavior of hiding, suppressing, or camouflaging natural traits in order to blend in, to avoid conflict, or ensure safety. So when somebody is masking, it might look like forcing eye contact or mimicking somebody's tone or over preparing for a situation or ignoring sensory needs. Um, and so over time, if you're masking in social spaces, at school, at work, that becomes a full-time performance and comes at a very serious cost. So if you are constantly monitoring and altering your behavior, that is very mentally and physically exhausting. And it also leads to a disconnect from your identity. So when you are disconnected from your identity, that again can have long-term impacts like chronic stress, anxiety, depression, dissociation, etc. And even in supportive spaces where people may have the freedom to unmask, it can be very difficult to unlearn that you have to hide who you are in order to be accepted. So that fear of rejection becomes so deeply embedded that people resist unmasking or asking for help. So in order to unmask, you need a very deep sense of psychological safety and belonging. And so when we think about ADHD assessments, they're usually looked at through a medical lens that often fails to account for the lived experience, and it often fails to account for instances of masking. And a lot of times when we're looking at assessments, particularly for adults, they often confuse trauma symptoms with learning disorders or behavioral disorders. And some of that confusion can lead to misdiagnosis or overdiagnosis. And it just reinforces stereotypes and it justifies that exclusion from safe learning environments. And so that dominant medical model is very much rooted in Western thinking, and we look at it binary. So it's either a typical brain or a deficient brain. And it like that binary concept is not harmful, but it's also inaccurate and very much reduces that complex human experience to just a deficit. And so as we talk about society's expectations for people based on those neurotypical ways of thinking, working, and interacting, and if we look at this list here, there are many examples of expectations that are challenging for an ADHDer to meet. So somebody with ADHD might have unpredictable focus, or like we talked about earlier, they might have a variable experience with executive functioning, and that can lead to inconsistent productivity. And in a challenging situation, maybe an ADHDer can't control those strong emotional responses, or they need to have that fidgeting and movement in order to be able to manage that energy and maintain focus. So trying to meet those expectations can be very, very difficult. So if we look at this iceberg, people see that hyperactivity, they see the inattention, they see the impulsivity, but they don't see all of the things that are going on underneath. They're not seeing that this person needs a lot more sensory input. So they're bored. They need more input in order to be able to stay in the moment, stay focused, or maybe they forgot to eat because they were just so busy doing everything else. So that can also lead to more challenges with emotional control, for example. So some examples of experiences. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. I'm at least as frustrated as you, probably even more. And with all of that said, it is no wonder that 80% of adults and 43% of children with ADHD have at least one co-occurring mental health condition, and it's typically secondary to ADHD. Very challenging. So before I get into support strategies, I want to remind you that nothing is ever a one size fits all solution. When you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. So if you are going to try some of these things for yourself, or you're going to support somebody else in trying them, it's okay if you try it and it doesn't work. You can modify these things and adjust according to what feels good to you. So without getting too philosophical, everything is made up, the rules are bendable. And even if something seems silly, it's worth trying it anyways. So the very first part of supporting ADHDers and neurodivergent individuals as a whole is starting with a neuroaffirming culture shift. So asking ourselves, how might this space be experienced by somebody who communicates differently or processes information differently or regulates differently? What's one change that we can make in order to reduce that friction for everybody? So recognizing that people are experts on what they need, and what their preferences are. And we don't force these things. We build trust and we build relationships in order to create those safe spaces where people can be themselves. And if you're supporting somebody with ADHD, that allyship really begins with awareness and it grows with action. And when we are talking about neuroaffirming care, we are talking about improving the quality of life, not just for neurodivergent individuals, not just for ADHDers, but for everybody. And it promotes that holistic well-being. And part of that neuroaffirming culture shift is recognizing the role of Indigenous neuroaffirming care. So honoring all of the ways of learning and the ways of knowing, seeing each person as a whole person, looking at nonlinear development, so everything in its own time, looking at more so intuition and sensory wisdom rather than just what has been told to you, creating space for that identity and learning through connection to the land, through stories, etc. So backing those things up by starting with building an ADHD team. So anybody who can offer positive or neuroaffirming support, whether in a small way or a big way, is a great person to have on your team. So that might look like a parent or guardian, it might look like educator, learning specialist, community group, peer group, etc. Find your people. And of course, right at the bottom here, you are a part of your ADHD team. So getting to know yourself, embracing your neurodivergence is really key to understanding yourself and being able to connect with others. So fostering that sense of belonging and growth. And the more connected you are to yourself, the better connected you could be to others. And when we're connected with others, especially those with similar neurotypes, it can be really validating to share experiences because you have shared language and mutual support. It can reduce that shame and build resilience. And the stronger that we are as individuals, the stronger we are as communities, the easier it is to advocate and self-advocate. And self-advocacy is a very essential skill to have, especially for somebody who might have various support needs like an ADHDer. And like everything else I've talked about, it's not explicitly taught and it can be very difficult to do. So when you have safe spaces to be able to practice self-advocacy and to be able to express yourself, that can be quite helpful. So sharing with the people that you trust, and it can also be helpful in responding appropriately to people as well. So starting in a safe space can be really helpful. So looking at some tangible support options, what I'm presenting to you here is an ADHD support or rescue plan. So this is something that you would typically do when you're in a regulated state and not when you're completely dysregulated. And breaking it down. So what are some of the warning signs that maybe I'm becoming dysregulated or I am overstimulated or overwhelmed? So maybe I'm doom scrolling or I'm zoning out or I'm having to repeat something over and over or just like can't think straight. So what can I do? So let's start with some small steps. Maybe I just need to take a 5-minute break. Maybe I need to just get up and change my location. Maybe I've been sitting in this same spot for way too long. Maybe I just need to pay attention to my breath or drink some water with electrolytes. And then we can come up with some rescue tools. So what are some bigger steps that I might be able to take? So maybe I can find a friend who's willing to be a body double. So a body double is when somebody is doing something with you, not necessarily the same thing. You can be doing different things, but in the same space, because having that external accountability can be really helpful. Maybe going for a walk and getting outside might be really helpful. Have a snack. When's the last time you've eaten? Or maybe I just need to make a list of all of the things that I'm thinking about or all of the things that I need to do. And then very important is to include examples of positive self-talk. So good enough is good enough. If I get it done, it just needs to be done. It doesn't need to be perfect. I can make it perfect later. Start small. What's the smallest possible step I can do? So going back to that, maybe I just need to change locations. It's okay to have a rough draft. Let's do it. I am me. I am enough. And so another way you could look at this is in a table. So what are some helpful strategies and tools that I have used? So when you are in a dysregulated state, it can be really hard to recall things. So if you have a place where you've written down the things that are helpful, you can refer to it. Or if you're supporting somebody with ADHD, you can offer those things. So having an alarm for everything, a brain dump notebook really works for me. It really works for me to write down all of my thoughts. So just having that available. Again, self-talk. Who are the people in my life who are helpful? Who can I call? Who can I text? What are some boundaries that I can set? So no checking emails after 6 p.m. Maybe it's 7:30 and I'm checking emails and I'm getting dysregulated, but this is a boundary that I've set. So I need to stop looking at my email. I can look at it tomorrow. Practice thinking before saying yes to everything. So like, thanks for thinking of me. I'll get back to you. Maybe there's some things that you want to try. So you saw something on Instagram or somebody told you about something. You can add it to this table. So maybe I want to try drop bins, which I'll talk about in just a minute, or small steps. So maybe I keep throwing my dirty laundry on the bathroom floor instead of the hamper in my bedroom. So maybe I'm going to put a basket in the bathroom too, just to help. So taking note of how you're moving through your day and what small things you could do in order to make it easier. And again, there are no rules. So like you can have a laundry basket in the kitchen if that's where you're dumping all of your clothes. It doesn't matter. Just if you want to get it into a laundry basket, put a laundry basket there. So I'm going to go through a couple of strategies, some that you've probably heard of before. Some of them are quite common, and then I'm going to give you a remix. So starting with name it to tame it. It's very simple, but it can be very powerful in regulating your body or returning to regulation. So when you're experiencing strong feelings like anger or anxiety, the concept is that identifying it, so saying I am angry, becomes much easier to calm down and manage it. Especially if you have something like this where you're very emotionally dysregulated, what strategies could I use to get myself from that anger back to a regulated state? So like we talked about, your prefrontal cortex in the front of your brain controls a lot of this. So give it a name or draw a character to represent it. If any of you are familiar with Magic the Gathering, excuse me, I look at my brain as the card called Elder Brain. So I have a very visual picture of my prefrontal cortex. And when you have those strong feelings or you're getting overwhelmed or having difficulties, just step back and recognize that your brain is struggling and you can treat it like an external being, like a friend. So you might not say nice things to yourself, but would you say those not nice things to a friend? Probably not. So talk to your brain as if it is external to you, which can be quite helpful. Body doubling. So we talked a little bit about this. Somebody sitting with you while you work, even if they're not doing the same thing. So maybe you don't have somebody who's available to body double with you. Do you have a favorite celebrity or somebody you look up to? Make them your body double. So print a photo of them or bring it up on your computer or your phone and imagine that they are in your space. So, for example, Marcel the Shell, he wants to see you succeed. He believes that you can get up and put in that load of laundry. And so if you bring up this Marcel the Shell and you're not going to put in that load of laundry, you're going to make Marcel the Shell really sad. I myself in my house have a lot of things with eyes around, and they all have a very specific job. So they're making sure that I'm putting in that load of laundry or that I am, putting my clothes in the hamper, etc. So that can be really helpful. And it also gives that ADHD brain a little bit of a dopamine hit as well. Pomodoro and transition cues. So the traditional Pomodoro technique involves working for 25 minutes or taking a 5-minute break. But transition cues can actually be much more helpful for an ADHD brain, especially somebody who struggles a lot with time. So before starting what you're about to do, set specific stopping points. So, okay, I have to write this essay. I'm going to start by just writing one sentence, and then I'm going to get up and walk around the room, and then I'm going to sit down and write another sentence. Or I need to fold all of this laundry. I'm just going to fold the towels, and then I'm going to take a break. And during my break, I'm going to listen to 2 songs. And when those 2 songs are over, I'm going to come back and fold all of my shirts. I personally do my laundry by types of clothing. So I wash all of my shirts first, and then I wash all of my pants. And it's much more helpful to me because those things all go together in my drawer and I can just fold it into one pile. So those transition cues can be quite helpful. Spaces. So drop boxes, clear bins, open bins, they are great. So when you have to take extra steps, so for example, opening a drawer or opening a cupboard, that is an extra step that your brain, your ADHD brain does not want to take. So when things are visible or they're accessible or it's easy to toss into, it can help minimize clutter and it's a much easier system. So very similar to your prefrontal cortex, you can give your Dropbox a name. And it adds novelty again. So, for example, if you've ever watched It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, my trash can's name is Danny DeVito because he's the trash man. So Danny DeVito wants garbage. He is the trash man. So we have to put our garbage in the garbage, or else we're going to make Danny DeVito sad, and we don't want to make him sad. And last one, brain dump. So just writing down whatever's coming to mind. So whether that's a to-do list or it's just thoughts, etc. Most helpful before sleep, and you can do it any way that works for you. So voice note or note app or post-its or whatever. You could also do this with a deck of playing cards. So you can turn it into a fun way to complete tasks. So maybe you just really need to write down your to-do list. You can write each thing on a card and you can shuffle them and just pick one randomly. So that gives you a little sense of reward and novelty again. Or you could assign a suit to a category. So maybe you want to assign diamonds to ideas. So you've got to find a card with diamonds on it and then you can write down your idea. So again, just adding that little bit of novelty and excitement. So your ADHD brain is wired differently, doesn't make it any less amazing, and not about fitting in, but finding what fits you. And again, the rules are bendable. They're not real. You can do things that are strange, well, that other people think are strange. If it works for you, it works for you, and that's fantastic. So before I open up for questions, just want to give you a little bit more information about what we do at Learn, Develop, Succeed. So most of our services are one-to-one instruction. We offer that in person in East Vancouver and in North Vancouver. We have a couple of partner schools and a mobile classroom that we drive out to our community, and we also offer online sessions as well. We offer assessments for identification of strengths and areas for growth. So related to ADHD specifically, we do offer an executive functioning assessment, which can be really helpful in understanding where your skills are and what you might want to work towards. And we offer assistive technology services and professional development and workshops just like this. And we do have other free workshops on our website as well that you can access. So thank you all again so much for joining this evening. I hope that you were able to reflect a little bit, that you learned something. And I'll open up for questions. So you can either post in the chat